Okay, thank you very much for joining us today at today's third debate session as part of the WAIPA World Investment Conference. The theme running throughout this conference is the regeneration of IPAs in a new decade. And this panel will be looking at this question through the particular lens of IPA's interaction with businesses. So just by way of introduction, my name is Damien Bruckard. I'm the Deputy Director of Trade and Investment at the International Chamber of Commerce, the World Business Organization, and institutional representative of the private sector around all corners of the globe. So we're very proud to be a strategic partner of WAIPA, where we do many activities together, including most recently through helping with the establishment of the Business Advisory Board, which is a very good segue to today's theme, because really what we're looking at here today is how IPAs can better work with businesses, how businesses can work better with IPAs, and how we can make sure that we get the best investment practices across the world. And we're very lucky to be joined by several panelists with a very broad range of experiences, deep experiences too, in IPAs and the private sector as well. So we have with us today Crispin Conroy, who is the permanent representative of the International Chamber of Commerce in Geneva, and previously an Australian ambassador and senior trade commissioner with a long history of working in IPAs. Armando Helbron is the investment promotion workstream leader at the World Bank Group, but previously has worked in the private sector investment facilitation for over 35 years and has a deep amount of experience in this topic today. Alparslan Korkmaz, who is the founding president of ISPAT, the Turkish IPA. But before doing this, he was also head of one state canton in Switzerland, and has spent much time consulting to many IPAs around the world about how they can improve their practices, and also is a lecturer in cross-cultural communication. Michael Cullen is the managing director of the Latin America practice of FTI Consulting, and has a broad range of experience working with businesses in that region. And Monica Ramirez, the director of CoCrea in Colombia, who has also worked in IPAs, both in attracting inward investment and promoting outward investment. And finally, we have Ratnaka Adhikari, who is the executive director at the Enhanced Integrated Framework Secretariat at the World Trade Organization. So without any further ado, let's begin the substance. So turning first perhaps to Crispin Conroy. Crispin, you've worked at attracting FDI as a former Australian ambassador and senior trade commissioner. Now at the ICC, you deal with businesses trading abroad on a daily basis. So what, in your experiences, are the key things investors are looking for when investing abroad?
Thanks. Nice to see you. And let me take this opportunity to greet my fellow panelists, especially Monica and Michael, who are good friends, and to welcome all the participants as well. Also, I'd like to thank WAIPA for inviting ICC to participate in this event. As you mentioned, Damien, I was with the Australian government for a number of years as ambassador and then senior trade and investment commissioner, often working with Australian companies looking to invest in overseas markets, principally in Latin America, and then with foreign companies, principally in Italy, as they develop their investment strategies for Australia. The first point I'd like to make is that an effectively functioning IPA can play a significant role in attracting productive foreign investment, foreign direct investment, and in assisting foreign investors with their investment strategies, in accompanying the investor on their investment journey, and in providing aftercare service once an investment has been made. However, many investors don't naturally think of going to an IPA when they're starting to develop an investment strategy, or when visiting a target market. For example, when I was Australia's Senior Trade and Investment Commissioner in Bogota, in Colombia, Australian investors didn't always make the Austrade office their first stop. But usually they eventually did contact us and were pleased with the assistance they could give us in navigating the Colombian system. And one of the first appointments we would make for them was with our local counterpart, ProColombia, or regional agencies like Invest Bogota. In this context, I believe that the decision by ICC and WAIPA to increase their level of engagement and to create a business advisory board, which you mentioned, is a very positive development. Through this sort of collaboration, we are expecting that business, that will be a better understanding of what investors need. And we hope to raise also the level of awareness in business of investment promotion services through the ICC network of over 45 million companies in more than 100 countries. In my experience, the main thing that investors are looking for when they're investing abroad are predictability in the regulatory environment, coherency in policy, and consistency in messaging across the relevant government agencies, and transparency in relation to decision-making and access to information. IPAs don't control all the levers of the national regulatory environment, of course, but an IPA should play a role in ensuring that the national regulatory environment is consistent with the government's foreign investment strategy. In other words, it's no use having a dynamic and ambitious FDI strategy if the national regulatory environment doesn't enable such investment. Investors are also looking for a coherent and coordinated approach. Again, IPAs have an important role to play in ensuring a coherent narrative at the international, national, and subnational, say in a federal state level. Again, it's no use having an external narrative, say through embassies or overseas trade and investment offices, that welcomes foreign investment if there's no common narrative or coordinated approach around this strategy and process back home. I've often heard it said that large companies don't really need the assistance of an IPA, as they have the resources to go direct to government through external advisors and consultants. Many do choose this route, but in doing so, they may well miss an existing network of specialists with the experience and contacts to accompany them on their investment journey in a more direct and holistic way. In Italy, we work closely with one of the largest private and renewable energy companies in the world on their exploration of the Australian renewable sector, which was of increasing interest to foreign companies because of a more attractive regulatory framework. I don't have time now to go in much more detail, but we could explore it more in questions perhaps. But the company decided to invest and then reinvest in Australia and utilized the IPA for access to national and regional decision makers, information on specific projects that met their profile, possible co-investors, lists of advisors like lawyers and accountants, etc. I remember meeting with their CEO a short time after their initial investment to ask how we could better support them. His response was, just keep on doing what you're doing. So I think just to underline that even big companies with a lot of resources can get a great benefit from an effective IPA. I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Crispin. And I think, you've really spoken about what investors are looking for generally based on your experience, and it might be good now to turn to Armando, who from his vantage point at the World Bank must see very different practices around the world. And I know, Armando, you have recently done a survey of IPAs and have some really interesting findings that you might be able to share with us. So it'd be great if you could talk about some of your experiences relevant to this discussion.
Thank you, Damien, and thank you, WAIPA, for giving me the opportunity to share and learn today. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah, I would show in a few 5 minutes why IPAs actually need to be more like businesses. And this is, I think, a good segue towards the research that we have. Before that, let me say a few things about what the World Bank has been doing. It's for about 30 plus years, we have been working individually with countries to foster private sector, among other things that you will know the World Bank for. And private sector means domestic and foreign. And as part of that, some of you may remember FIAS, and FIAS has been also providing support on the policy side. And MIGA was providing support on the promotion side. So for many, many years, the World Bank has been engaged country by country all over the world in this business of investment promotion. But also we have done research, and we are in contact with investors to get their perceptions, and as well doing research about what IPAs are doing, their characteristics and their performance. So Let's start by asking first the customer. In this case, if you're a business, you would ask the customer first, what do they need? So let's ask the investors, what do they need? And here's what we found out is that these global investor surveys reveal investors expect from IPAs help to improve the business environment. That's the number one aspect, with critical and important percentages beyond 75%. They also value hands-on assistance in setting up. And even the large companies, I couldn't agree more. I was involved with very large companies and medium and small size companies, and they all appreciate having one friend to be talking to, like, you know, business to business talk and walk. And in this case, they do appreciate that assistance in the beginning, setting up, but also when they're operating, when they're having issues, grievances. Who do I call? I call my agency if I have a problem. So those two things are extremely important, and you can see it in the three buckets here, how we segmented the wishes of the investors. They also appreciate that one single point of contact. We have heard it in previous sessions during the week. Investors saying, hey, I want to go to this one place and actually get answers for my questions and get that support. They should make it easy for investors, these agencies, and they should be good conveners. So within the location, they can gather whoever's necessary to think about it and sort out the issues. And so these are things that resonate most likely with most of you, but I'm just repeating what I heard in the last few days here. However, our global IPA surveys reveal that IPAs are still operating mostly in two areas. One is the front end, just going to events, promoting, marketing, the branding, and maybe some travel to meet one-on-one with investors, right? That's still a problem there. But this is front-ended, and that's what we call the initial stage of the investment attraction or investment life cycle. That is attraction within that. The second thing that I wanted to say is that because this has been an issue for long, the World Bank Group just got very deep into the topic of services that investment promotion agencies are providing. So we ask investors again, and we ask agencies. And in this particular case, yes, just rubber stamping an agreement to, or agrément to get into a country, let's say, is not a service. They actually see it as another regulatory barrier to enter a country. So just by now, everybody knows about this. So no screening, investors don't want that as screening, and they don't see an agency providing a service for that thing. So how do we go about this? We build this comprehensive investor services framework, which is a table, as you can see here, that studies the categories of services agencies provide in the rows and across the stages, the 4 stages that we at least see the investment life cycle is: attraction, entry, and establishment, retention, and expansion, and linkages and spillovers. And when you look at this granularly, you actually discover very interesting things. So we survey IPAs, and we found out that, yes, they are, as I said, at the front end, providing marketing at attraction. I already mentioned branding, investment events, travel, and in the COVID times, maybe doing virtual things because they are not too much able to go physically. They also provide information that's critical, and this is fantastic. IPAs listening now would say, well, you know, this is what IPAs are for. That's perfectly fine. Now, when we ask investors, is this enough? They actually say, we most value these services in these buckets, actually, and those agencies or many agencies in this particular country are not providing this support when I'm having trouble during the operation, etc. So this is very important, I think, to know, is listening to what the investors are and try to kind of match this. And there is a gap. You can see there's a gap in many ways. So the last slide I have for you is this framework, which brings in lots of empirical evidence to investment promotion practice, if we call it that way. And in that context, you could see that the best performing agencies, or we call it high performing agencies, have a few characteristics, or what we are now calling critical success factors. If you don't have that, the likelihood is that you are not performing in there. And this is where everybody needs to be listening. And the way IPAs need to behave like businesses. It's a hard concept for agencies that have been doing this for many long time. It's actually easier for new agencies that would have the DNA already in this right mode of being a business, providing services to a business. Now they're within the government, so that's the issue. So how do we close this gap? Is, yes, I mentioned, listen to investors. So do research as an agency, what investors want in your strategic sectors, and apply these few principles I'm going to be telling you about. I'm going to run down because we have no time to go in specifics. But again, on the first pillar, strategic alignment and focus, we have found that these high-performing agencies focus on a few strategic sectors. I say few. The younger the agency, the fewer the sectors, right? If you are very old, 30-something years, I mean, you may have a lot more experience and you can do with a lot more. But in the beginning, a few. We have also found out that they do this with research. They engage in investor research, they engage in competition research. So how are the others doing? Sectoral analysis, either internally or they subcontract this to research providers. They also have fewer mandates. And it's very interesting, right? Because you would think, oh, let's bring in trade and investment and domestic and this and that and PPP, and the more the merrier and more powerful I get. But empirically, especially when you are a developing nation, pay attention, the more mandates you have, the least performing you become in terms of attracting FDI. And this is empirical evidence based on the research that we have done. The other important thing is the focus on meaningful results. So these agencies become like a business oriented in sort of the triple bottom line or whatever it is nowadays. You have good KPIs that measure SDGs. You have good KPIs that go into gender, beyond jobs, and actual creation of jobs, of good wages, etc. So all these indicators are there in those type of agencies. And last but not least, they engage in sectoral promotion activities. So all of these is just one pillar, right? And it's really packed there. Second pillar. The second pillar is to build a coherent institutional framework. And this is not just your own agency, your own institution, is how you relate to the others. And in that context, you have agencies that are more like a consultancy and or financial service company. And in that sense, they are investor friendly. Yes, I mentioned that. They have some level of autonomy. They do have a board of directors with more representatives from the private sector. Listen to this. They do have some management and many professional staff with private sector experience and paying comparably to the private sector so that they can attract good talent in that endeavor. They have systems that leverage digital technologies more than ever, right? This is important. And they do identify and have systems to identify investor complaints early on in the process, right? So they're not waiting there to get the investor to come with an issue or even divest, and then you find out in the newspapers. You actually are constantly engaged with these investors to find out what's going on with them, either good or bad. And they do many other things. Last pillar, 3. I mentioned a lot of this, and we went into the comprehensive investor services framework already. So these agencies do provide more of the buckets in the comprehensive investor services framework with relevant and quality services. It's really sad to see when you actually do quality satisfaction or relevance of what investors perceive of agencies. And we have done this in some countries when you get the investors saying that the agency is providing 50% satisfaction in particular services, and that perhaps the agency is providing some services that are not as relevant as they would like to have other services that are relevant to the investors, and the agency is not providing a good level of response there. So these are things that we know from our internal research that I think are quite relevant, and they provide empirical evidence to basically bring the foundations of a high-performing IPA, more like a business, as I mentioned in the beginning. So again, significant findings that are some food for thought, and that agencies that are really looking to attract more FDI need to bring into their day-to-day. And with this, let me leave it there, and I'll be happy to answer any questions in the Q&A section. Back to you, Damien.
Fantastic, thanks very much. And also, can I just say what a cogent presentation at 5 a.m. in the morning in Washington, D.C. Very impressive. No, I'd now like to turn to Ratnakar from the Enhanced Integrated Framework Secretariat at the WTO, who's the executive director there, because I think some of the really interesting things coming out of the last presentation were the importance to businesses of IPAs making efforts to improve the overall business environment, and also the role of IPAs in promoting development, which is obviously crucial in least developed countries. And for those of you who may not know or may need a refresher, the Enhanced Integrated Framework is a multilateral development program assisting least developed countries integrate into the global trading system and reap the benefits of trade for development purposes. So with that introduction, Ratnakar, I was wondering if you could bring some perspectives specific to least developed countries to our conversation today.
Thank you, Damien, and greetings to everybody. In the current context of COVID-19 pandemic, least developed countries, LDC's investment attraction potential has significantly deteriorated. Due to low vaccination rate, economic recovery is bound to be tepid, which will further affect their investment prospects. So in this context, what I would like to do is to just make 2 points in the interest of time. The first one relates to reorienting IPAs offering for added value. Given the uncertainty, the role of IPAs is critical, particularly in reorienting their services offers to become higher end and provide additional value to investors. There has been some progress in a number of areas in some countries. However, more can still be done in the following areas. The first one relates to increased use of digital tools, and this is already mentioned. A number of IPAs have continued to strengthen their online presence during the COVID crisis because they have been providing information and services through their website, social media, and virtual platforms and tools. However, digital capacity, culture, and resources differ in IPAs. While IPAs in LDCs such as Benin, Bhutan, Mali have swiftly adopted digital tools, others are lagging behind. There is immense benefit to having paperless and automated procedure. And this is probably happening in many developing countries, as you know, or developed countries, but then it's a far way off in the case of LDCs. This may stress the need for and value of digital signatures, one-stop shops, and more generally government facilities that do not require physical visit to obtain relevant information and licenses or permits. In Bhutan, for example, a trade and investment portal providing consolidated information on investment procedure was launched last year. The portal is complemented by other e-governance efforts such as one-stop information system. The second one is becoming more adaptive and resilient. The COVID-19 crisis may propel agencies to reconsider their prioritization strategies in the medium to long term. Changed economic dynamics should entice IPAs to revise the list of prioritized sectors, making them more focused on altering the mix. Emerging areas of focus for LDCs could include health sector, for example, digital transformation, ecotourism, renewable energy, and circular economy. Then the other important point, and which has been also highlighted already, is the point relating to the advocacy role that they can play, not only in the context of devising a policy that is going to be investor friendly, but also to make sure that they are able to help the agency, other agencies resolve the problem that are arising from the lack of smooth flow of information. And then when new regulations are adopted, particularly in the pandemic context, IPA will need to support investors navigate the rapidly evolving legal frameworks. Then finally, enhanced networking and capacity building would be absolutely critical. Exchanges among IPAs through peer networks on experiences and lessons learned can be critical for adapting their services offering. With increased regional trade arrangements in Asia and particularly in Africa, African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, the role of regional investment promotion is key, and the linkage between trade and investment to promote regional value chain is critical. It is equally important to keep the staff abreast with new development and provide tailored support to major investors by understanding their needs and priorities. For example, the ongoing supply chain disruption could affect the ability of export-oriented companies to function effectively. The support they may need may be completely different to a hotel industry, which is affected primarily due to low vaccination rate in the country. So the second point that I would like to make is the road ahead for IPAs. As the LDC governments come to grips with the challenges posed by the economic downturn, there is an increased pressure on the government coffers. This may translate into public budget reductions and an increased pressure to do more with less, including through reallocating resources and undertaking new tasks. In this context, IPAs may also see their budgets strained, in particular as governments may shift their priorities and reconsider their approach to international trade and investment. In addition, ministries may require IPAs to reorient themselves towards servicing domestic firms and other government bodies, ministries and regional agencies, for example, and away from their foreign clients. Yet, considering the potentially important benefits of FDI to local economies, particularly in LDCs, and the development impact that you've highlighted just now, and the role of IPAs in attracting foreign direct investment, it is important that the right balance is sought. Support is needed from international community to help IPAs from LDCs undertake these transformations to emerge stronger from the crisis. The EIF is already collaborating with WAIPA, UNCTAD, and other partners to address some of these key areas, and we remain committed to continue working with partners on these areas in the years to come. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I thought it might be good now to turn to someone who has worked on both sides of the fence, so to speak. So, Monica, I know you have worked in Colombia for both a domestic and a foreign investment promotion agencies, meaning that you've seen companies working with IPAs from both sides. I was wondering whether you could talk to us about some of the lessons that you have learned about what priorities IPAs tend to, or perhaps should have, when promoting inward and outward investment from those two different perspectives.
Thank you, Damien. The priorities that I've seen, I would divide into two main areas. One of them is structural. And obviously structural also means evolving, because countries or cities do have dynamic behaviors, but one of them is structural, and the other one that I've seen is opportunity-based. And this is in a sense that investment promotion agencies do end up working in a sense as the sales force of those national or local priorities. If there are major infrastructure projects, or there's a new incentive or a new sector-specific law, then investment promotion agencies normally end up trying to attract investment in those towards those specific areas. And I think that makes a lot of sense. Obviously, investment promotion agencies do focus and have to focus on what the competitive advantages of a country or a city are. It doesn't make sense to promote or try to attract investment to an area where a country or a city is not competitive and does not have those advantages. So I would say those are from the inward investment point of view, those are the areas, and obviously, governments change and priorities change. So there does have to be some flexibility in what those promotion agencies are actually focusing on. But I completely agree with Armando that I think focus makes a lot of sense. When investment promotion agencies are all over the place, in all areas, in all sectors, I think that shows that the lack of experience in a specific sector shows. And I think that I also do agree that IPAs should be more business focused and should operate more like private companies. And I think clients are looking for advisors more than bureaucrats. They are not looking for government officials who can just connect them with government or help them navigate the system or the specific sectors. I think they do need people who understand their language, understand their sector, understand their specific needs. And I think one of the things that, at least in my time when I was working at investment promotion agencies, was not a huge focus, but I think should be, and I guess it is happening in some of the best practices, is measuring impact beyond just jobs and money that is being invested in a country or in a region. I think it does make sense today to measure the impact of an investment promotion agency, for example, more in qualitative terms. For example, what the sustainable development goals, what is an IPA doing in terms of reaching those goals? Or, for example, in impacting specific or sector-specific ecosystems. Are the gaps being closed by what that investment promotion agency is doing? And I think that's also very, private sector focus, meaning it's not just how much money I can bring in, it's what I'm generating beyond that, those very tangible things that are normally measured in an investment promotion agency. And I think there's also another area of focus that is sometimes overlooked, and it's when investment promotion officials that work in these agencies work with a specific potential investor or an investor. It's not just about the companies, it's also about the decision makers. We cannot lose sight of the fact that there are people behind these decisions of setting up an operation in a specific country or a specific city. And behind those decisions, a lot of the times, is quality of life, who's coming, who's the expat, who will set up the office in that location. Is that person, will he or she come alone? Is he coming with his family? And I think sometimes IPAs can lose sight of that very personal component or element of the decision-making process. There's always people behind that analysis. It's not just a company decision. And so I think what IPA should be focusing on, or I think what best practices in this sense, are obviously the company's needs, but also what people will be involved and how we can address those issues and make sure that this decision works for the company and the people involved in that decision.
Thank you so much, Monica, and especially for your very corporate-like focus on the theme. I actually wanted to pick up on one of the things that you mentioned there about the difference between advisors and bureaucrats as a way of introducing Alpaslan, who I don't know how you would prefer to be introduced, but I know you have certainly been an advisor to many, many IPAs and yet have also been an official in an IPA as well. So I suspect you might prefer the advisor moniker. But I was wondering if you could talk us through your experiences in working with and advising IPAs about what makes best practice for a client.
Thank you very much, Damien, for the introduction. And first of all, I would like to thank WAIPA for inviting me to this platform, and obviously greet the distinguished panelists and also the distinguished audience. First of all, I consider, to start maybe my answer, IPAs like service providing entities. They are service providers. and they have two customers. One is upstream, one is downstream. The upstream customer is the state or the region. They have requests, they want job creations, key sectors, they want to enhance their value chain, they want technology transfer, etc. So this is the state side. And the IPA has a function to understand what are the real strategic goals of the state and transfer this towards the market and go and deliver a service to the investor who is the customer at the end of the day of the IPA. This has always been my vision and therefore has to serve the customer in the best way possible. I mean, before, during, and after, these are the keywords that all of us, we know by heart, but it has to be a reality, not only just a word, okay? Because worldwide, I have seen a lot of one-stop shops that were, let's say, to be very diplomatically correct, not always very much one-stop shops. But at the end of the day, everybody speaks about the same words, you see? So, and this is why I'm telling here that actually we have two logics in between the IPA. One is the state logic, which has a different approach, which is sometimes long-term, sometimes short-term, and whatever. I mean, depending on the, let's say, system. On the other side, you have the customer, who is the investor, and the investor is the one providing and generating, let's say, added value and to the society. So here, the IPA has a role as a bridge, as an interface. And sometimes I would used to say, when I was founding the Turkish Investment Promotion Agency from scratch, when nothing was existing, I was telling to my guys, hey guys, we are enzymes. We are facilitators. We must understand the language. And here I will use exactly the same wording as Monica, Armando, etc. were saying before. I mean, we must understand the language, but not only the logos, not only English or Arabic or French or German or whatever, but also the pathos. So what is embedded inside? What are the feelings and also all the notions that are embedded? And even sometimes people speaking the same language, which can be English, would understand the same word from 1,000 different manners. So understanding the private sector, to be very frank and direct, my style was, when I built up the Turkish Investment Promotion Agency, not to hire a single state servant. So I hired only private sector people, only. And then I thought these guys, they will learn how to navigate inside the system, but they must first speak the language of the downstream customers. So this was my first approach, if you wish. And I also agree on the fact that IPAs have different roles, not only to understand the state and convey the message and convey the strategic, let's say, axis of the state, etc., but also as being feedbacking entities from the market towards the state. So understanding what's going on, on the market, what is the competition doing, what are the requests of the real investors, because these guys are generating value, and then feedbacking this to the, let's say, legal bodies or rule generating bodies, government, etc., in order to generate the right reforms, the right changes, the right policies, etc. So at the end of the day, to answer your question again, I will come back to this, Damia. I think that IPAs are entities that are service providers, and this is an absolutely right statement of Armando, because I was so happy to serve Switzerland, which is why my heart country where I'm born and raised up, but which is the mature country, which is a totally developed country, etc. And then I served Turkey, which was the country of my parents, which is also my heart country. And I came to Turkey. In Turkey, I could build up an IPA from scratch. Nothing was existing. And to be very frank, this is where I could make a lot of difference with an amazing team we could generate and an amazing right momentum between 2006 and 2010, when Turkey was undergoing through a lot of different reforms and a lot of different structural reforms. And this is so important, and this is going to be my conclusion. Whoever you are as an IPA and how important is your role, at the end of the day, for me, IPAs are cherries on the cake. And if the cake is not functioning, is not delivering the right taste, which means the country is not promising, is not, let's say, stable, has not the long-term policy, has not structural reforms going on, etc. I mean, this is going to make your task pretty difficult to ameliorate the cake just with a cherry. So this is in a nutshell my approach, Damia. I'm obviously ready to answer all kinds of questions afterwards.
Fantastic. So we've got a cherry on a cake in a nutshell. And let me commend you on your logos, your pathos, but also the ethos of your intervention, because you clearly have the authority to speak on these matters, and that was extremely persuasive. So thank you. Also, speaking of authoritative speakers, I would now like to turn to Michael. As a consultant, having consulted many companies investing abroad, I was wondering if you could touch on what value do your investors generally see in an IPA, and whether it's really marrying with what we're hearing during today's conversation. And do they need to change their practices? Obviously, the world has changed a lot in the last year. We've heard about some of the difficulties, especially facing least developed countries' IPAs, but more generally, the world has changed. So how is the landscape shifting, and what value do investors see in IPAs generally?
Thank you very much for that. Hello, everybody. Obviously, IPAs bring tremendous value, both in terms of encouraging investment and then assisting in the actual investment process. I'm the president of the Australian Colombia Business Council here in Colombia, and I know very much from firsthand experience the quality of these organizations is absolutely critical for foreign investment. One critique, and obviously we're talking in a realm of constructive criticism here to try and improve the environment, but one critique of government agencies that is that I feel, in my experience working in the environment of Latin America, that they often paint too rosy and unrealistic a picture of the facts on the ground. They obviously want to encourage investment and only emphasize the benefits and opportunities, but in so doing, they often present an unrealistic picture of the reality on the ground and set unrealistic expectations for the critical investors. So just taking Colombia, for example, I mean, this happens all around the world. And I've, the last 20 years, I've lived in multiple international developing jurisdictions. But taking Colombia as an example, it's a fantastic country where I've spent the last 12 years of my career. However, there's an obvious difficult history of conflict. I'm not saying anything out of school there. You just need to have a Netflix subscription to work out that element. But when a government agency equates its environment to, we've just heard about sort of a Switzerland environment, that seems to be a scenario that many of these IPAs sort of come back to, that, we're kind of this incredible Switzerland scenario, and you should invest and you need to invest. But I've always felt that it, here in Latin America, for example, it sets a dangerous precedent. So the difficulty on the back end of that kind of promotion is that once one or two companies get burnt as a result of the reality on the ground and they haven't done their necessary homework properly, then the IP loses the trust and credibility with the international investment community. So at the end of the day, the IPA needs to be brutally honest about opportunities, but also risks, so that companies come in prepared, thereby not contaminating their credibility within the investment community with, back-end horrible war stories. I know the IPAs think they're doing their job by talking about the positives, and I get that. I get that there's an element of patriotism, there's an element of nationalism that runs through the narrative that is handed out to the international investment community. But I would just emphasize that it's most certainly a short-term perspective. Transparency is the best antiseptic. It's kind of like one of my catchphrases working in the industry that I do. But pie in the sky promotion is problematic. I think IPAs are getting much better at this, both here in Latin America and in Africa, Asia, etc. But I still think there is a long road ahead for all of us.
Thank you very much. And that's a wonderful phrase, actually. Transparency is the best antiseptic. Really like that. So now I'd like to turn to our final speaker, Amar, who is actually from a government investment promotion agency, that of Egypt. So I was wondering if you could please walk us through what, in your experience, makes an effective IPA, and having perhaps heard the discussion so far, whether this is all chiming with your perspective from the government side. Just double checking that you're there, Emma. I think he may be having connection problems. So in the meantime, what we will do is skip over to a next section, really as a way of wrapping up. And I want to ask all of our speakers a question here, a very basic one, which is, what 3 things can IPAs do to work better with businesses? So that's one option, our panelists. Your second option is to answer the question, what 3 things can they do to facilitate strategically significant investments? So why don't we take the same order that we started with and start with Crispin, very crisply, your top 3 pieces of advice.
Thanks, Darren. Crisp by name, crisp by nature. Yeah, so look, I'll go for your first option and pick up Michael's point. I think trust and credibility is incredibly important. And a way of doing that, always an IPA will, as Monica said, we're salespeople, so you will give a certain spin. But I think the responsibility also is to introduce investors to people, say like Michael, who've got a broader picture of the environment, so that they can actually, make their own decisions. So I think an IPA has a role to introduce potential investors to a range of different experts and advisors, not just them. Secondly, strategic focus, and I think Armando raised this. You can't just encourage investment for the sake of it. You need to be very strategic and be aware of the sectors where the country needs it most. And finally, again, picking up something that Armando said, I think you termed it as grievances, Armando. We used to call it aftercare. And I think aftercare is particularly important, not just to rest with, tick your box, get your KPI, but aftercare is important because if you don't manage grievances, then an investor might pull out. And secondly, if you don't remain in contact and understand how the journey is going, you may miss an opportunity for increasing that investment or attracting them to a different part of the country or other projects. So they're my 3 points.
Thanks very much. So we've got 3 minutes left. Armando.
Thank you very much. Yes, I would say that aftercare, we all need to do it because that's where you can get the reinvestments. And if you're not looking for what investors are doing or feeling, you may find out again that the investor has left the country or even sue the country because of situations that the agency could have been supporting. Okay, 3 things is going back to those 3 pillars. I think we have gathered enough evidence over the years. So strategic focus and alignment so that you're part of the overall ecosystem, and touch on this thing that Alpaslan mentioned, the working with the stakeholder, which is the government. That's your boss, your shareholders, but then as well with the customer, which is the investor, right? So you got this duality, but the strategic alignment would allow you to do that and also focus on bringing those transformative investments that the location needs, and it is also competitive for. The second thing is work on your institution, your core, and it needs to be more like business, and it doesn't need to be bloated with lots of people. No, it just needs the right people, okay? And last but not least, services. So this becomes an acronym. I like to call it SIS, SIS, Strategy, Institutions, and Services. And all of these work for your second question, which is bringing in significant and transformative strategic investment to your location. Back to you.
Fantastic. Thanks very much. So Ratnika, your 3 tips.
Points, actually, I want to mention. The first one is to decide the priorities with what you choose as your strategic priority sector. What is a strategic sector for South Africa may be different to what is a strategic sector for Burkina Faso, for example, right? So therefore, it is important to decide your priorities. They have to do their research, do their homework, They have to scan the environment and then come up with the priority. That's the first one. Second one, I come back to this again because it's important that the advocacy role is becoming even more important in the context of the changing dynamics and all kinds of different, regulations and rules coming up. So there, the investment friendliness of government policies and regulation, is important. Therefore, the IPAs have a role to play in convincing other government agencies not to impose requirements that are too restrictive for investors. And the third one, they come back to what I mentioned earlier, is the human capital element. That's absolutely critical, and the capacity building element of the IPA's staff is important. And then IPA need to follow some kind of a business approach, like account officer or portfolio manager or whatever. They are responsible for managing a group of investors, right from the initial stage to providing aftercare services and addressing all the grievances. So one window, when we talk about one window, it's really one window in that sense. You're talking to one individual who would, resolve most of these problems.
Fantastic, thank you. So then, Monica, Alparslan, and Michael, your very quick recommendations, please.
Very quickly, mine. Create a positive feedback loop. If the organization is user-centric, then you can use that feedback to see, to understand what needs to be done or changed. Balance the interface that Alparslan mentioned, public-private, this role of connector of public and private needs and priorities. And I would say measure impact beyond jobs and money.
Yeah, and as always, Monica just took the best points. So I agree with everything Monica said.
Okay, so maybe just as a conclusion, give me a lever and I will raise the world, was saying Archimed. I think the most important thing is to have the right strategies, the right teams, and the right focused business approach. And I think this is what gives us success to countries.
Well, what a wonderful way to conclude. Alparslan, you've quoted Aristotle, Archimedes. I think maybe the theme here is go back to basics and get the fundamentals right, and everything will be okay. So I'd like to extend a huge thank you to all of our speakers today for a wonderful and informative session. I hope you all got something out of it. I know I did. And so on behalf of the International Chamber of Commerce, I would also like to thank WAIPA for putting this all together today. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your conference. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. Warmest welcome to the 2021 award ceremony of the Strengthening IPA Advocacy Services Competition, a joint initiative of WAIPA and the World Bank Group. My name is Armando Heidbron, and I am pleased today, being the master of ceremony. We'll have a few exciting surprises for you, which I hope you enjoy. To start, let me hand it over to Mr. Fahad Al-Kergawi, CEO of Dubai FDI and President of WAIPA for 2019-2021. Over to you, Fahad.
Thank you, Armando. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. Your Excellencies, dear colleagues, and WAIPA members as well presenting here today. Greetings from Dubai. WAIPA is committed to enable IPA's success and contribute to sustainable economic growth, resilience, and prosperity across communities, cities, and nations, as well as regions, by promoting cooperation between investment promotion agencies, providing technical assistance and capacity building, as well as facilitating sharing knowledge and best practices among its members and global FDI committees. Advocacy plays a critical role across all functions of investment promotion agencies, from advancing policy reforms and FDI incentives to facilitating investors' journey with public and private stakeholders, as well as ensuring the positive impact of FDI projects on the economy, society, and environment. I'd like to take this opportunity to extend my deep appreciation to the World Bank Group for their continued support and fruitful cooperation with WAIPA, working together with the World Bank Group to deliver this global competition on strengthening IPAs advocacy services is a testament of this strategic partnership to serve WAIPA members and global FDI community. I also take this opportunity to congratulate all the winners and thank the participants of this inaugural competition and wish you all the best for advancing the advocacy function within your respective IPAs. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fahad. And we all have great reasons to celebrate today. As part of what I do, I work on investment promotion globally as the work stream leader for the World Bank Group. And today I also have the pleasure of representing the Global Investment Climate Unit of the World Bank Group, which is the unit that hosts investment promotion within the World Bank Group. So I will make a few remarks to start with. Our unit, the Investment Climate Unit, provides technical advisory and financial support to governments around the world. Some of you listening here may know about our work with your country, with your agency. And this is to enhance investment climates, to unlock green, inclusive, sustainable private sector investments, and to create better employment opportunities, transform the economy, have a better quality of life. I mean, all these things are what motivates us every day to come to work. And investment promotion agencies is the core of what I do. They are increasingly playing a role, a critical role in enhancing environments in which investors operate, the ecosystem, as they also call it. And this is a way to attract, retain, expand more private investment. So in that context, IPAs have a direct day-to-day contact with foreign investors. In the previous panels, we have said that they are in this space between governments and their location and investors, so they could be a connector. And through this connection, they learn about issues and needs of investors. They would be better able to understand those issues and then in turn advocate for necessary reforms. And research from the World Bank Group and WAIPA showed that foreign investors attach the highest value to the IPAs advocacy services. So to help improve the business environment. We saw it in the previous session as well, those of you who were listening to that. And the critical importance of advocacy services, especially during the times of COVID, is what prompted WAIPA and the World Bank Group to partner and launch this competition to award extraordinary IPA advocacy efforts. I will now hand it over to Zenia and Ahmed for a description of the competition. Over to you guys.
Thank you, Armando. So good afternoon, good evening, good morning to everyone, all of our esteemed guests. Thank you for joining us for this award ceremony, and my warmest congratulations to all of the winners. My colleague Ahmed and I will briefly provide some context on the competition, the submission criteria, the selection process. The competition was launched in December of 2020 with a deadline for submissions in March of 2021. So over 40 submissions were received from national and subnational investment promotion agencies around the globe. The advocacy services that were eligible to be awarded through the competition included services focused on data collection, so how an agency coordinated and interacted with investors and private sector representatives to identify the issues that were limiting investment in the country or region. And IPAs Access to firsthand information, as Armando has said, allows them to design and implement data collection tools such as surveys, interviews, meetings with investors, industry representatives, so that they can develop detailed information tracking systems and identify key challenges. The next category was for services focused on the analysis and development of reform recommendations. So this would cover how the investment promotion agency formulates and submits proposals that are geared towards improving the investment climate based on the feedback that they received from investors. And the final category was how investment promotion agencies channeled and tracked the information and used it to influence reform. And so this would include how they were gathering the data and information and using that to follow up on government actions and improve the investment climate. So I will now hand over to my colleague Ahmed to discuss how the submissions to the competition were evaluated and selected. Thank you.
Thank you, Xenia, and thank you everyone for joining us. I'm sure all of you are very excited about the announcements of the 2021 Advocacy Awards winners. Before that, I will brief you shortly on the overall evaluation process and the key criteria used for determining the winners of this competition. So after receiving all submissions by the end of March 31st of this year, and we received over 40 of them, which was previously mentioned by my colleague Xenia, WAIPA and the World Bank team shortlisted the top 15 submissions. These top 15 submissions are sent to our distinguished panel of judges that selected the overall winners based on the following evaluation criteria. For the key evaluation criteria, the maximum number of points one submission could receive is 100. This key criteria is consisted of 4 main segments. So for the overall description of the reform that was provided in the submission, a maximum number of points that could be given is 20. Furthermore, for data collection process and how well this data collection process is described, the maximum number of points is 20. For the analysis process and result of the reform recommendation, a maximum number of points that could be given for this segment is 30. And finally, for the influencing segment, which indicates the instruments used by an IPA to influence the reform adaptation and overall implementation of the particular reform. So for this segment as well, 30 points could be given. In addition to this key criteria, we had additional 20 bonus points, which are spread around four, let's say, segments. So the first segment is impact of the reform. The second segment is the investor feedback received. The third segment is the COVID-19, to which extent this particular reform mitigated the effect of the overall pandemic. And the final segment is the creativity, how creative the reform is. Each of these segments carries 5 additional bonus points. So overall, this was the evaluation criteria that was used by the esteemed panel of judges to bring decisions of the final winners of this competition. Armando, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Xenia and Ahmed. And I have to say that we're very thankful to the 4 judges that conformed the panel to evaluate all these submissions, because that was not easy task. I can tell from the many documents that we had to send to them, or from their submissions of the agencies, that they had to go through a lot of documentation and a lot of meetings to decide on the winner. So thank you very much to the panelists or the panel of judges. And we will now 2021 winners, and a very much expected moment, and that would be done through a video that we prepare for this special occasion. So I hope you enjoy it. Ahmed, please cue it. Thank you very much.
Ethiopia Investment Commission won gold for its forward-looking approach to open new sectors to private sector investment.
In 2019, the Ethiopian Investment Commission initiated a 6-month investment climate exercise. After that, in 2020, Ethiopia is coming to the open up for new ideas, new innovation, and new economic sector that has been closed, and we were not open for new ideas. That has been changed dramatically after the approval of our new regulation and proclamation. 3 new investment projects have materialized. So EIC has the legal foundation in which these reform agendas could be realized, and so that we can show that it's time to invest in Ethiopia.
Toronto Global won silver for its efforts in rebooting Canada's largest and most economically diverse regional economy in the face of COVID-19.
The challenge is really, how do we make this a great city going forward? How do we continue to make this, the best city to live and to work and to play, not just in Canada, but in the world? Quality of life issues around, transportation, affordable housing, making sure there's broadband throughout the region. We want to attract the best people around the world. We want to grow our own. We want to attract immigrants. I think one of the biggest impacts is just having the region work together. In the last 6 months, we've seen significant interest from organizations setting up in our region. Some of the top companies in the world are now calling Toronto home. We're now in a position to really, I think, come out of this pandemic to really lead the world, and we're really excited about the opportunity.
Invest India won bronze for ramping up innovation and startup ecosystems in India.
Where in 16 months, a country can just start a new initiative and become a global leader. We are number 3 in the world in number of unicorns. We are number 2 in the world in number of startups. We are number 1 in the world with new startups adding every day. But I'll tell you which is the biggest thing and the biggest point of success in India. It's not just about the numbers of these startups. It's not just about the unicorns. It's not just about new startups adding every day. But it is about the momentum created by these startups, which is fastening the rate of growth of change and transformation, and the creation of a foundation for a new India.
This year's 2 honorable mentions go to Invest Cyprus for its reforms for thriving ICT and fintech sectors.
Invest Cyprus' mandate is to raise awareness of Cyprus as a destination for FDI across the globe. As a direct result of our advocacy efforts, a reform package was introduced comprising of a new immigration framework and several other incentives for individuals relocating to Cyprus. Since the reforms were introduced, we have witnessed an increasing interest by existing and new international ICT companies to set up and scale operations.
Honorable mention go to the Bangladesh Investment Development Authority for enhancing the investor experience through a well-structured one-stop shop.
Bangladesh Investment Development Authority, as the apex investment promotion agency, tried to facilitate the private investment, and we established our OSS platform, and that made the investment processes much easier. Even during this pandemic, when everything was closed, our OSS remained open 24/7. This is much faster, it's much transparent, and it reduces cost for the investor.
My warmest congratulations to all 2021 winners.
All right, I hope you also got inspired by this video and these IPAs' great reforms, which were possible thanks to their extraordinary advocacy services. And it's worth repeating because it was a tough competition. On behalf of WAIPA and the World Bank Group, we extend warmest congratulations to all the winners of 2021, the competition for investment promotion agencies' advocacy services. All right, So with that, let me move on to the next section of the session. We will proceed to invite our panelists of the top 3 awarded IPAs. For that, we're delighted to have with us the distinguished top leaders of such IPAs. Let me introduce briefly Lelise Neme, Commissioner of the Ethiopian Investment Commission, or EIC. Thank you, Lelise. Stefan Lund, CEO of Toronto Global, Canada. Thank you very much, Stefan. And Deepak Bagla, Managing Director and CEO of Invest India and new WAIPA President. By the way, congratulations on that too. And many thanks to all the 3 of you for joining this panel and sharing experiences with our distinguished audience as well. And what I would like to do, because the video just gave a very high level description of the reform, is if you could, in a few minutes, brief us on what the reform was about. And then we'll take it from there to dig in more into what the reform was and how your IPA was organized about it, what challenges you faced, and some of the lessons that you would give to agencies wanting to do advocacy services for their investors. So why don't we start with Lelise, and you tell us, Lelise, briefly what this reform was about and the impact it created. Over to you.
Thank you, Armando, and thank you, team, and congratulations to all of us. I'm very happy to see those videos with this way. It really inspire us a lot. We are honored to be recognized as one of the top IPA reformers in the world, and this award is a testament that the efforts has been undertaking as EIC, and we believe that Ethiopia is now on the way of reforming themselves in the policy, and we believe we will definitely continue our advocacy work to address the gaps that make to Ethiopia that they preferred to invest in Ethiopia. So as I go to the question that Armando mentioned, you know, the Ethiopian Investment Commission is an autonomous government institute that promotes specifically the investment opportunity to the foreign direct investors. So our core service include engaging global promotion of investment opportunity that Ethiopia offers, issues permits that allow investors to operate in Ethiopia. A major part of our work also include policy advocacy. We have a dedicated division led by one of our deputy commissioners that oversee research and policy advocacy. We believe this work is very important because it allows us to make changes in the regulatory framework that respond to change circumstance, both internal and global. And it will also create a conducive environment where the investment could grow, job could be created, and the goals of FDI could be realized.
All right, thank you very much, Lelise. And in terms of the reform, I understand that Ethiopia had come from a period of time in which mostly the government was undertaking many of the activities. And in that context, the mindset was to start opening slowly. And there was a first phase, and then this, I think, was a big bang phase. Could you tell us a little bit about that situation of these sectors that were open to private investment and to foreign investment as well?
Yes, of course, Armando. In 2019, the Ethiopian Investment Commission initiated a 6-month investment climate assessment exercise, which is leads to the identification of critical regulatory barriers on the investment entry and operation. So then this technical working group composed of our staff and other experts, including specialists from the International Finance Corporation, were organized to identify these policy recommendations. This informed the need to move from positive to negative listing. We then facilitated a lot of stakeholder engagement and consultation with the public and private stakeholders to socialize the reform recommendation. After this validation of workshop, we presently finally to Ethiopian Investment Board, which is led by His Excellency Prime Minister Dr. Abiy Ahmed. Finally, the board granted a go-ahead for a complete
revision of the investment law, which led the drafting of new investment proclamation and regulation. So those both paradigm shift really definitely support us as a government to have that back to support us on the receipt of our approval. So in early 2020, so after the new proclamation came out in the effect and the regulation later in the year, the historic policy reform has been moving from positive to negative listing, mean the expect of a few sectors that are fully or partially reserved for domestic investors. All other sectors of the economy we made open for indirect investors. This made the huge dramatic shift, and the FDI entry process transparent, straightforward, and future-proof.
Yeah, that was definitely forward-looking by the government to hear from its agency, EIC, about the impediments of furthering investment and private sector involvement in some of these activities. I recall telecommunications, for that matter, was monopolized by the government, no longer the case with this very important reform, manufacturing of cement and all the construction materials and many other activities that now foreigners can come in and join with domestic or establish their own operations in the country, thus taking way forward the possibilities of transformation of Ethiopia as an economy. So greatly done. And I hear as well that you organize within EIC to have an advocacy unit that prepare all this research, as you mentioned, the investment climate assessment or so, and the consultations that I'm sure they were not easy, and bringing in the government and listening to private sector as well in this process. So I now understand all this effort to move the country from a positive list, which is these are the sectors, the few sectors in which foreigners can invest in my country, to a negative list, which is these are the few sectors foreign investors cannot invest in my country. These are reserve activities. And so the negative list approach is actually best practice, as I understand internationally, is just telling investors these are reserved, like military or sometimes communication, and those activities are reserved for domestic and or government, but no longer in Ethiopia. Many of these sectors, including telecommunication, are open. So with that, thank you very much, Lelise. Let's move on. May I ask Stefan to give us a high-level brief of the reform, what it was, because Toronto is the most diverse and the largest economy within Canada, and so I don't think it was an easy task. Go ahead.
Thank you, Raman, and thank you, WAIPA, thank you, World Bank. Congratulations, all the winners and the panelists, and greetings from Toronto, Canada. Let me just provide a bit of context, first of all. Pre-pandemic, Toronto was on a bit of a roll. We were the fastest growing major city in North America. We were the fastest growing technology center in North America. We were the most multicultural city in the world. We still are. We were attracting over 100,000 immigrants a year. And then, wham, we get hit by the pandemic like everybody else. And it really threw us back. And I think what it did was, it really gave us an opportunity to step back, take a pause, as they say, don't waste a crisis. Plan for the city of the future. How do we make this a livable city? How do we make this a great place to continue to attract investment from around the world? And how do we make it, livable and a great place to live? And so we partnered with the Toronto Regional Board of Trade under their fantastic leadership to create a document, a playbook, Shaping Our Future. Looked at 3 transformations, 10 specific items to address everything from affordable housing to transportation to broadband, to really get a sense and bring the whole community together to say, okay, we want to get back to where we were pre-pandemic. We want this to be such a dynamic city. And it was a great exercise. And I want to thank my executive VP and my VP for really taking leadership, but really making acknowledgement to the fantastic work by our Toronto Regional Board of Trade, which is a real world leader. And it was an exciting opportunity and a great
challenge, but rewarding for us to do that from an advocacy perspective.
Very inspiring. Thank you very much. And that resonates with me. Don't waste the crisis. So definitely, well, we can complain all what we can, but this pandemic really hurt everybody in the world. So why complain? Let's work to actually build back better. I think that's also what inspired you guys. And this preparation of documents that were, if I understand correctly, very detailed and covering many aspects that would become the ecosystem for the investor, their living quarters, their work environment, etc. So well done. Thank you very much. And how did you organize internally to do this and to advocate, to prepare all this and go through the steps of good advocacy?
Yeah, thanks. Great question. There's really a couple of parts to that. One, it's internally in my organization. And I'm going to throw out, Terry O'Leary and Daniel Hengerbill, two of my key people, really took the lead, creating a sense of urgency for doing this. But again, I go back to our Board of Trade, which is a great partner for us, taking the lead. So you've got to create a sense of urgency to do that. But secondly, you've got to rally the community. You can't just do it alone. The pandemic hit, everyone was busy. We have 24 municipalities in the greater Toronto region, and you can even say 34 if you go a little bit further. But how do you bring all the key people that are so busy doing their day job, so busy fighting the pandemic, and we're asking these city managers, these leaders in every aspect of government to join us? You better have a pretty good story to tell if you're going to get everybody to give up their time and create a sense of urgency. So we were able to do that. People bought into it. They were excited about this. They realized that, in spite of their day jobs, this is so important for this community. It's so important for this region. It's so important for our country that we do this. And it was exciting to see everybody really pull together and work on this. So, kudos to everybody that did that. It was a great initiative.
All right. Thank you, Stefan. And no doubt that the agency by itself cannot do this alone. It takes actually the power or the convening power or authority, let's say, to bring everybody. And the authority of the agencies is pretty much the data that they have, the interaction with investors, what they know of investors that then could be useful for the government. So maybe later you can tell us a little bit more about the secrets on how you got the attention of all these stakeholders around you. And before that, we'll go to Deepak. So that Deepak, in terms of India, it's a very complex economy, very large country with diversity from top to bottom, from east to west. And so in that context, tell us about how you brought about this reform and perhaps also what this reform was, because what we know from the video is that you helped to establish the platform for innovation and to bring it up to have startups being created in a few years' time. And so in that context, please give us a little bit more detail about the reform. And you already mentioned the impact, creating unicorns and having many more startups every day, et cetera. But give us a little bit more of the background of this and then how it went forward from the side of the agency. Over to you, Deepak.
Thank you, Armando. I must say, this was a fascinating experience for all of us. The learning was immense. But before that, I have to compliment you, Armando. And I have to thank Fahad and everyone for getting together and creating this platform. Very important. And thank you to the entire jury. And it was really inspirational. When I was hearing Stefan and Lilies, I could see the learnings which are already there for all of us to pick up. And by the way, Stefan, I must say that background shot of yours is brilliant. I mean, if that is the result which you have created, it's a complete winner. It's really love it. I'm going to save it for my own. But I'll tell you what it was, and I'll tell you why it is fascinating. By the way, I must add, Armando, we've got 3 global business schools which are now taking it up as a case study. And I'll tell you why that is happening. The challenge statement was, look at India. We needed to create 1 million new jobs every month. And we needed to do that for the next 10 years to be able to take up for the demand which was there. So the Prime Minister said, instead of job seekers, let's create job creators. And they picked up that one of the biggest strengths which was happening in India was the entrepreneurship. So he said, let's create startup as a movement in India. Now that was the challenge statement put in front of us. And it was a blank slate. And we all know the diversity, 1.3 billion, 21 official languages, 2,000 dialects. I mean, you know, on any axis of diversity, it is just off the charts, which we speak of. And then please remember 70% of the world's, 12% of the world's population lives in my villages, which is 70% of my population. We may have the richest, we may have the poorest, so it's all across that. The challenge was, how do we create an entire ecosystem and a movement for startups? And the second challenge was, how do we break the existing mindset where everybody was just going for a secure government job and failure was a bad name? So we are working on two axes. One is changing the social mindset, and the other is creating an economic ecosystem which creates movement. So what happened first is, and by the way, it is a brand new slate we had to work on. So we created ourselves into multiple teams. And first was to create a national framework. We went into very, very extensive stakeholder consultations across the board with the government officials, with the stakeholders, got immense level of feedback. Then worked on global best practices, be it Israel or be it others, how they joined the dots. What is it which they did? Then started creating a framework of policy. Now I'll tell you the biggest challenge of creating a policy of this kind in today's environment is, one, things are changing very fast. To envisage that what will be required as a policy 20 years hence or even 10 years hence is trying to hold a falling knife. That means you have to keep flexibility within that policy so that there is constant stakeholder interaction and the government is to keep changing policy. I don't know if you recollect, old policymakers used to really take pride that if we created a policy, how many 100 years did they continue with it before it died out? And you know, we still have laws which were created for us in 1894. I think there's the old telegraph law, which we finally did away with. And Armando, just tell me wherever to shut up, I will, because I can just go on this one. So it was a fascinating experience on the first to bring global best practices to see what was adaptable in India. That was done through a lot of stakeholder management. Then every 6 months, we would go on to see the impact of that policy on the ground. In fact, we did 200,000 phone calls, just and in 11 different languages, just to keep getting feedback on what is happening at the ground level, which element of that policy is working, which is not working. Then this is the national level. Then we had to take it to the sub-national level to my 28 states and 8 special territories. Now, what happens in each one of them is a country by itself. They have their own uniqueness. They have their own freedom. They create their own laws. So we had to create it specifically for each one of them and to see how it moves and fits into the global national one. Now, what helped us was people like you, Armando. If you recollect, I would call you often and say, okay, send me global best practices. Send me the, policy statement which you did for somebody else. Let me tell you, the value of all of you is immense when a country is starting to create its policy frameworks. The knowledge levels you bring in and the credibility which you bring in of your experiences helps us immensely. So that is how this entire process started. And eventually on the 16th of January, 2016, we had the Prime Minister launch the National Startup Policy. We didn't have a policy until then. And this policy was a mix of incentives, a mix of creating ecosystem, a mix of seeing how do we change mindsets. We ran public statements, news items. We started taking care of people, or we started idolizing people who had left businesses, youngsters, or lucrative jobs like in the World Bank or in other agencies, and doing a startup of their own. When that movement started, is when you realize the success of your policy. And even today, there is every 3 to 4 months, the policy is being reassessed, there's stakeholder inputs coming in, and that policy is taking change. It's always work in progress. Sorry, I get carried away. I can
no doubt, a fascinating story, and you definitely win the prize for diversity in India. No doubt, those of us who have had the pleasure of being in the country, you can spend your whole life just going from place to place there, and learning about all this. And very interesting challenge, which is how do you bring in the individuals and entrepreneurs or people to become entrepreneurs to get the economic growth and to provide for their own income, to give themselves the job they want. So that's fascinating. We also talk a lot about gazelles, but you mentioned several unicorns, which are those things that never or nobody has seen. And that you have generated through this program several unicorns already in a few, what can I say, in a few months or years. So that's fascinating. So with that, thank you very much. Why don't we do the following? Let's now go back to l'Élysée in terms of the challenge, the most important challenge that you had to face and how you solve it. You've mentioned a few things already in terms of consultation, but I'll leave it to you to tell us what was the key challenge that you faced in moving this forward. l'Élysée, over to you.
Thank you, Armando. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you, Stefan and Dapak, for sharing those information and the experience that you had on your country. For us, changing those policies was a big challenge to change the attitude of our government stakeholders. Even local investors was a bit challenge, but we try to solve by creating a platform of discussion, engaging with different stakeholders, so that what will be the profit, because sometimes we feel safe when we close things, but it's not. When we open something, there are a lot of opportunity there that will come to this country, and we have seen a lot of change. So we try to coordinate this stakeholder engagement by inviting the private sector, even the government sector, so that to share the experience. After that, we got a good support from the government side, especially from His Excellency Prime Minister and all the investment board members. They were supporting a lot. They were open for new ideas. They were open for new transition to do a dramatic change that will happen if we open the sectors. And the other thing is that we get a lesson from different countries. We share this experience to all of them so that they can agree. Then after a lot of debates going forth, they agree, they open, and we see the success story after that as well.
No doubt, and you mentioned the attitude, so that's very important. But then in the end, political will to move this forward and how you convince the unconvinced in that process. So fantastic. Stefan, very quickly, one key challenge that you face in rebooting the economy of Toronto.
Boy, I'm going to take this opportunity to make it 1A, 1B, 1C. Coordination, buy-in, and action. You can do all the planning and discussions and all that you in the world, but unless you have an outcome and define what success looks like, then you might not be in the right track. So you really have to create a sense of urgency, bring people along, but you have to have a defined output. In other words, what does success look like? And you have to be driven to action. So
absolutely.
Overcoming those challenges.
Yes, thank you very much. So then this coordination is very important, and the call to action, otherwise then it stays in the papers. So very well. And then Deepak, you mentioned already this challenge of the mindset in this new reform of getting startups to be, more frequent in India. And so that was, how do you sort it out, this challenge of the mindset because it's not just in the government, it's also in the people who would start their own startups very quickly.
See two very big challenges. One is, how do you see that reform reaches the person who actually requires it? Stefan alluded to it, that coordination. And so you need a top-down and a bottom-up approach. We had buses fitted with people which would just go into villages, talk to them about the startups, etc. The mindset change comes again when the top leadership and the idols of the country come forward and start speaking about it. And trying to say that failure is not bad. Failure is what we learn from. That was the initial phase. The moment we had 3 or 4 years down the line and we had unicorns, then obviously there were examples everybody would want to follow. Life becomes much easier. It's like a hockey stick.
Precisely.
You just have to turn around that bend and then it just takes off around it.
So the first effort is the one that is most difficult. All right, listen, and conscious of time, I'm going to attempt to summarize a few key ideas here, which is utilize the crisis, utilize the big challenges you have ahead to actually bring forward some big reforms. And that was the case of Ethiopia, the case of Toronto, the case of India. They all had big challenges ahead of themselves, but the agency didn't just rest on the laurels or stay there passively waiting for things to get better. They proposed, and you heard many things. There is the investor feedback and consultations, coordination, the action, political will, going subnational, and monitoring this impact so that the reform is having an impact. Otherwise, then why bother? And with that, let me thank all the panelists for attending today. I know they're in very different time zones, from Toronto, early morning, to India, late night. And I hope, honestly, that this session inspired more agencies to engage in advocacy as a race to the top in improving the conditions for investors worldwide, from America to Asia and Oceania in the mean, and to take IPAs to a whole new level. From marketers, as you heard in previous sessions, they have been staying there as marketers, moving to being a reformer and investment makers. The agency is really being front and center, creating these opportunities for investors. So with that, thank you very much, and the panelists. And I wanted to also thank my team who has been working with this for a year and a half, including WAIPA and World Bank colleagues, Ahmed, Senia, Alexandra at some point in time, Eva, and many others who have been part of this effort in bringing forward the first, but not the last, of these competitions on advocacy, because we strongly believe that if there is a role that the agencies need to play, listening to investors, is help me with the investment environment, help me with the investment ecosystem, make it better for me and for everybody. So with that, thank you very much to all the colleagues involved in making this possibility. Now, may I kindly ask Fahad to provide his closing remarks?
Sure, Armando, just give me, I'm driving, so let's give me a moment just to step by the road.
Oh yes, don't text and drive or anything else.
Yeah.
But yes, in the meantime.
No, but just quickly with that, first of all, I would like to thank everyone from both teams, World Bank and WAIPA team, who've been putting a lot of effort, including everyone who've been involved before and after this event. And this is a great initiative where WAIPA is joining hand with you at the World Bank to really put together the best possible scenario for awarding the active members of active IPAs who are really taking the challenge. And I would like to congratulate everyone. Toronto, Ethiopia, and India, who's going to handle our presidency for WAIPA, and also the appreciation to that goes to Cyprus, who are our new also steering committee member, and Bangladesh as well. We're very glad that this collaboration is going on,
and more of these type of collaboration really support IPA's community globally to make sure that they are seeing their efforts being appreciated on global scale, and their governments are really seeing that they will help them to achieve better goals for their economies. And as we are here, I will not be in the seat here next year. My colleague, brother Deepak will handle this. So we always say he will take the baton and continue the effort. I'll continue supporting them, of course. And WIPA members, I thank you, Armando. We're handling from a small city like Dubai to a large country like India, the leadership of WIPA. We're excited with all new things happening globally. And it's a exciting moments where economy is coming back, business travel is there. And I look in future to really meet many of you personally. I thank you again and the World Bank Group. And the last thing here is we're looking for a brighter 2020 years, and things are on the right track. Thank you so much for everyone listening to us or watching us, and congratulations for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fahad. And likewise, the World Bank Group really appreciates this partnership and for many years to come. So with that, thank you very much, everybody, the panelists, the panel of judges, you, Fahad, WIPA, my colleagues at the World Bank and WIPA, and to all attendees who were kind enough to listen to us today. Thank you very much. Until next time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye now.